Hey, we are back with episode 37 of Theory Forge. We've got Polaris with us, and Sailkite is back from his hiatus, all across the other side of the country. And we will be discussing the new blog, which was about investigation skills and kidnapping. We will be discussing, I hope, politics in Valor. And we've got Suffragette City because David Bowie died this past week, and we've decided that Jen Hobbs's wife, the detective in the blog, his wife tried to take him out because she wants to be able to vote in Crowns Rock and in Valor. Yeah, welcome back, Sale. How was your trip?
It's good. Well, it was a move, not a trip. But
Same
uh,
difference. You have to go someplace to get there.
I mean, it's been a hell of a trip. Okay. Anyway, it's good. I'm all settled down. I can finally do RevivalCast again.
Okay.
I can find the internet again, so I can
Yeah,
actually read about revival.
we missed you
Um,
in IRC.
yes, and I'm back and ready to go. So yeah.
And Polaris is here. I almost think Polaris is in the coffin.
I see how you are.
But
Glad to
no,
hear
she's
your
the
voice,
bright spot.
Sale. We missed you.
Thank you very much. And I think this is the first time that we've been on a show together, as I
It
recall.
is.
Yes, yes. Excellent. Excellent.
Cool.
Good.
So this blog, it's interesting because um, it's really supposed to be a focus on the investigation skills. It's almost a day in the life of a detective, but it's written more like a story, so it's a little bit. I mean, the skills aspect of it are a little bit difficult to pick out if you're not reading carefully for that specific reason. But it was a great tale. We have a quick ending. I don't even want to call it a cliffhanger, but it was a great story. It was a fun read. What'd you guys think?
Oh, yeah, I loved it. It was great. I like the storytelling medium for how to get across the mechanics and the meat of it and forwarding a story and then hinting at all these things that you can do, all these things that are possible. And of course, it raises questions, all kinds of questions that we can talk about.
Yeah, and I think too, it was interesting because there are a lot of little elements outside of the investigation skill and kidnapping. Um, that we got a little bit of the the state that Hohen's is it the Hohen's Gate? Not Hohen's
Or
Gate.
home
What's the
sport.
Hohen's Port? That the Hohen's Port is in that, it's a shady place that most people don't go unless they're doing something shady because it's not deep enough for big trading ships to port there.
Yeah.
What do you think, Sale, overall?
I yes, I mean I agree with Polaris that I think storytelling is a really good way to convey um, the game, without actually having gameplay. That a storytelling medium is as good as any, and perhaps I'd say a little bit better than any because of the kind of craft that you can put into it. Like it's hard to put craft into a gameplay video, and while and I mean it's not hard exactly to put craft into just a description of what our mechanics do. I mean, it takes some skill, sure, just as a matter of effective communication, but like you're basically just kind of reading the thing. But if you're making up a story, you have to actually make up a story and then make it sell itself and stuff. um, so yeah, I agree with Polaris in that sense. And of course, there are all sorts of juicy little details and things that got me thinking right away, all throughout there. And so I'm very, very pleased with it, of course. And I can't wait for more like it. Um,
Yeah, so in some places I couldn't tell exactly what was out and out possible from what information we might get from the study skill and what was just kind of story. Like there is a mention of study in the sentence, I think, that reveals that she's wearing. So we have a detective Hobbs. Jin Hobbs, um, and he's expecting that it's shady people who normally come through there. It's not the wealthy people, but turns out he's wrong. A wealthy woman does come into the doorway that he's renting in
Colborne.
where Colburn, yeah, and so he sees that it's an expensive silk dress, probably from Valier. The hat seems to be from Tide's End, um, which indicates that she's very wealthy. So I'm wondering if it's the study ability that gave some of those details, like where the dress is from, what it's made from, um, and things like that. What did you guys think? Do you think
Yes, I
that's more player skill, or did you think that was possibly some investigations, use of investigation?
well, a player could know that a certain style of dress is common in a city, regardless, right? I mean, people are going to be posting screenshots of their characters all over the place.
Right.
So as soon as we have,
That's what I figured.
yeah, so
Hmm.
as soon as we have access to, images or concept art or models or whatever of the actual dress that we'll see in different cities, then at that point it becomes something that a player could also know without their character knowing it. But
Hmm.
in this case, I think it's a study. Um,
Hmm.
just it seems like something that would be study, right? Like if you know that you know people from upper class Tides End or Valir kind of dress like this, right? Then you have a little tag or whatever that says that you know knows what people who who are upper class in Valir tend to dress like, and so then it would you'd study and it would check it and be like, hey, bingo, this person is wearing clothes that match this, and so then
Hmm.
the defense package would kick in and say, yes, you know that it's silk and that it's uh, a nice dress from Valir, and she's wearing a tied on hat.
Yeah, I'm wondering too how that would fit into brand names. Well, not brand names, but branding, I guess, because we will be able to add that to the things that we craft. Um, and maybe specifically, I don't. I'm wondering how much information of who created something will be available for players who don't have a study skill like that.
Well, I thought it was kind of interesting that, I mean, in the story, it takes us to here's the situation. He expects to go on the ship, give it a once over, and figure out XYZ simple. Okay, he gets there, it's no longer simple, and now he actually has to work. And at that point in the story is where I figure that Jin is now going to use his investigative skills.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's a mini game, I'm guessing that's when it would pop up. I don't know. I'm guessing. But there's a
Yeah,
couple of those
well,
situations where it seems like normal situational awareness and the deductive reasoning that goes with it, and then there's the actual crafting skill.
yeah, well, there's a difference between the investigation skill, I think, and then the study aspect of it. I think those are a little bit different. So I think the investigation part will have a mini game, and I think the study kind of starts highlighting stuff that other people wouldn't see if they're not using study. Um, but one of the interesting things I thought too was there are a couple of little glitches in the story which I didn't really follow too well because I love the fact that he says, she says how much, and he says 25 sovereigns, 25 sovereigns, and then she's like, yeah, okay, and he says per day. It's like, yeah, okay. Um, but then he says, well, he was hoping to get that done with quickly, as if he wasn't going to take a full day. I don't know if that meant that he was only going to do work for one day and then or a couple of hours and then still stretch that over for a couple of days. Um, I couldn't tell, but it was a fun playthrough that Oh, and a cool thing about that too is that he was saying that there's Jin was saying that it's not a deal until you shake hands, and I'm wondering if that means that you can get a contract without writing out a contract.
No, good question.
I want to see how sealing a deal works. Like, can you really just? shake hands, and that'll be it. I don't know.
I mean, if it were, I think it would just be a case where the game, saves. I guess the game would have to know that it's important enough, right? And then save a tag or whatever for both of you that says that you shook hands, right? But then it would be able to use that tag for a number of, for both the enforcement and non-enforcement of your contract, right? I mean, the fact that it's not in writing and assuming that writing is something of the standard means that you can then, play against that standard or play with that standard according to, how, how you and the other person cares to
Yeah.
interface with each other, right? I mean, if one of you tries to betray, or one succeeds even in betraying uh, betraying the other, then he's like, we shook on it. It's like, oh, did we? I mean, there's not right. It's possible to play with it because it's just it's an item of knowledge. Um, I don't know if that's something that will actually occur, whether the system is intended to permit that. But I'd say treat it like being in the world with people. If you want something concrete, for sure, get it in writing. If you're cool with honor rules, shake on it. But just know what you're going in for. Would be my personal view.
Yeah, so the deal is that this woman in a veil is looking for her husband who didn't show up to dinner last night. They came to Crown's Rock, I guess, from Valier on a ship. The crew is missing as well, and she's hiring him to try and find her missing husband. Um, and it was a cool little thing, because we've been told that marriage isn't really much of a thing in Crown's Rock, or I guess in Thalestan itself. And he does say marriage is for yokels and old families who only care about legacy. So there's these little other tidbits that he's
Yes, I
just
thought that was
throwing in
interesting.
there. Um, but yeah, they closed the deal with a handshake. We learned that no one goes to Hornsport anymore unless it's a shady deal. And then, yeah, he really starts kicking in his investigation skills, I think, once he starts looking over things. And it seems like one of the first things that picks up is a Hydra sigil. I can't tell again if a player might see that one, or if that was more of a, because it says that he, does it actually mention investigating there? I think it either mentions that he studied everything inch by inch,
Right.
or he kicked in his investigation skill there. So it seemed like he really scoured, I guess it was the upper deck, and
Yep.
only found one little thing at that point. Um, and it doesn't seem like it really led him to much of anything in terms of a conclusion, but that was one little clue that he got at that point. And then I think it's when he moved below decks that he found three unusual things. He found the two kegs that were tapped, except one was half full. The first one was still half full, so that seems strange that the second one was started before they
Right.
finished the first one. He found another mark of Hydra. I think it was on the kegs, and no, that was on the captain's chair. And then there's the hidden Hydra scroll that burned up through magic. So those three clues looked like they definitely came from the investigation skill.
Yeah.
And again, it didn't. I mean, it's interesting. So I'm wondering if that is highlighting specific. Like, did it highlight both of the kegs or one of the kegs? Um, Pay more attention to this one, that type of thing. And we got a mention of lore. I think it seems like the drug was made from island flowers. Island flowers. Um, so maybe it's even a specific drug.
Yeah,
That sounds like something they would have had to bring in from elsewhere.
Hmm.
yeah, perhaps. Either
So
somewhere else in Greyshore or otherwise,
Right.
or excuse me, somewhere else in um, the wait, the archipelago is the archipelago the Greyshore archipelago or the Blackwall? I can't remember. But either way, somewhere, yeah, at least from one of those other islands, if not
Hmm.
somewhere else entirely.
Yeah, well, Crown's Rock is part of a, yeah,
Right.
archipelago, I think. Yeah. Um, and then, yeah, he finds the doped keg with the island flowers. And he thinks it's strange that he's been drugged or kidnapped, but there's been no ransom. So in this story, we have what is maybe an NPC that's kidnapped. Do you think we'd be able to actually kidnap a player character?
I don't know. I mean, this is where my questions were. I mean, I kind of presumed that Lady Ayamata is an ST. She's either an
Oh.
ST or an NPC that, and I kind of lean in the direction of ST to be able to set up the story. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
wondering, that raises questions then right off the bat. If she's an ST or an NPC, then how are her abilities within the game, within the mechanics and the structures of the game, going to differ from what the average player can do? So that's kind
Mm-hmm.
of an open question. And then there's, it's kind of like, who concocted the poison? Who placed it in the kegs? Who moved the bodies? Or does that all kind of happen in the background as a hand wave in order to move the story forward? So that's a whole other question. And then um, things like there apparently are no tags transferred on the handshake, but they're transferred on the marks and that scroll, because when he takes it to the guy who could read it, he says, "Good God, you're reeking of Hydra."
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, so how do no tags get transferred on the handshake? But that's why I'm guessing it's an ST.
Mm-hmm. An ST or an ST inhabiting an NPC.
Right.
Um, and is Bet Monty Snipe? Who is Bet Monty in the chat?
Yeah, that's Snipe.
Yeah. Because he's saying Poma is an NPC. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, but Poma is the husband. Um, so yeah, I would think it's probably it could be an ST who's inhabiting an NPC for the
Right.
wife who's doing the contracting. Yeah.
Yeah, that's my
Um,
thinking. So then
yeah.
it's interesting that when they shake hands on the deal,
Hmm.
that there's no tag.
Well, what do you mean by that? No
Well,
tag there. Why do you say that?
because when he goes to his buddy with the information that he has,
Hmm.
his buddy focuses on kind of, well, I don't know, maybe you're right now that I think about it. I
No, but
thought it was
but
basically
no,
on the
think through the
object.
logic of that. I'm wanting you to talk through it.
Well, but it's like he's carrying an object.
Hmm.
So as I'm reading the story, I'm kind of assuming that the object is what, has the mark of Hydra on it. But maybe it is the tag transfer that happened on the handshake. I don't know. That's an open question again as well.
Or from being in the Hadra ship. I don't know for
Right.
sure. My thought was, you reek of Hadra. It's either, some quirk of the scroll, which I doubted, just because of, the fact that it burned up and stuff, right?
Hmm.
Unless that's some sort of Hadra incense curse thing, right? But even so, I wouldn't have a way to verify that. And I figure just being in the ship probably would be, you know, imparting some sort of smell there versus, or else, the handshake could have also given him the smell, right? Uh, but assuming it's something, more particular than just general fishiness, right? As is implied here with the magic hunter guy. I forget his name off the top of my head. I apologize. But
Monin.
is
Yeah.
it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Monin is the treasure hunter.
yeah, right. With that he probably has an experience or has experience with detecting this particular type of fishiness, for instance. So it might not be something that anyone other than him in this case, and presumably Jin himself didn't notice it, right?
I
Otherwise,
think.
his investigation would have he would have made
I,
note of the smell,
well,
probably,
I think that he
maybe.
noticed He noticed that he recognizes Hydra as, symbolic of the god, and he seems to know something about how that worship is. That it's sailors tend to use that. He recognizes that the scroll is magic, but he doesn't have the skills that would allow him to recognize that there's a curse. Um, so he's not actually able to decipher the magic on there, but the treasure hunter has experience with magic and curses and things like that. So I think that's his skill set. Um, that's
Right, but it's on the handshake between Monan and Jin where he says, "Good God, man, you reek of Hydra."
Oh, I think because he touched the yeah, because he
Right,
touched the scroll. But I don't think I don't think that I think that's part of the curse detection and the magic detection. I don't think that Jin has the skill set to recognize that.
right.
That's what I got from it. Um, and then so yeah, so he meets this old friend Monin, who's a treasure hunter. He seems to know more about magic. He recognizes the curse. He understands that it seems to be indicating that it's a long the curse takes time to. I don't know if it takes time to activate. It doesn't take time to activate because he fell asleep pretty quickly after drinking it. But it's supposed to prep him for a sacrifice, the husband. So he's been out for a while. Maybe that's what it is that it's going to keep him knocked out for a while, in preparation for a sacrifice that should be happening soon. He recognizes the portents in the sky too. Um, it's kind of funny to me that it's not the protagonist that's doing a lot of the deducting here of what's going on, um,
Yes, that is interesting.
but and Monin thinks that it's probably not so I don't know if we had mentioned the slave crew, but um, the crew of the ship were slaves. I think what Jin had been wanting to do was pin it on the slaves and say it was a slave revolt, and they probably killed the husband or whatever with him. But Monin says, yeah, it's probably not the slaves. It's probably somebody who uh, knew who came along, because they were seemed to be hiding things on the ship, and the slaves wouldn't need to hide that from each other if all the slaves were working together. Um, and so, because they're thinking about the slaves, though, um, it's Jin gets the idea that he should go check on the biggest slave sympathizer in Crown's Rock, who is the person who's now running the Wayward Rest orphanage. So that's a whole nother thing. Is That's going to be pretty cool if we're going to have things like slave sympathizers and maybe underground railroads helping slaves to escape. Um, I'm going to have to check that out on one of my alts. Um, but so he goes to the orphanage. He talks to the woman there, um, and it's the mention of the captain that kind of causes her to fess up that, yeah, he's there. I don't exactly know why she trusts him to give him that information, but she says, yeah, the captain's there, the slaves are there. Um, she tells him the story of how he fell asleep after drinking the grog, and two new crew members jumped up and think started transforming and attacking everybody else. Four of the slaves were able to overcome those defectors and throw them overboard or something like that. and then they took the captain to the Wayward Rest because they knew that they had a sympathizer there who would keep them safe. Um, and then he decides to leave to go get a doctor and inform the wife of the whereabouts of her husband. He goes and brings the doctor back to the orphanage and spies that the wife is already there, and she doesn't quite look the same way as he thought when he was first encountering her. Um, he notices that beneath the veil, her mouth seems a little bit wider than maybe humanly possible. Um, and that's where tags seem to be kicking in. It seems like he's gathered enough clues at that point that he's able to notice more details that he probably would not be able to notice if he hadn't gathered those clues. That's what I'm guessing. Is that
Yeah.
the way you guys read it?
He connects the dots at that point, or slightly before that point. I connected the dots about that point as well. I
Hmm.
had an inkling at the very beginning of the story, but about there is like, oh yeah, this is where it goes bad.
Yeah, I think so. I had been wondering if he had studied the wife more closely in the beginning, could he have gotten more clues about her? Could he have recognized something beneath the? I'm looking at Snipe. He put in parentheses, chose the right dialogue option, and I'm
Right.
wondering at what point is that? Is that during the earliest conversations, or would those not become available until after he had gathered some of the clues?
Snipe is clarifying about the reason that Din Heflin let him in to see the captain was that he says that, or that was that he said that he didn't think the slaves did it,
Right,
because
right.
because she's trying to prevent any sort of punitive action being taken against the slaves.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Though there could still be dialogue options, right?
Yeah. Well, that's yeah.
In
That's what I
Jin's
was
tree.
thinking. It seemed to have been a dialogue option that triggered that. I wasn't sure what it was, but yeah. Okay. It's the slaves instead of mentioning the captain. Okay.
Yeah.
She trusts him because he's not gonna mess with the slaves. I get you. Um,
But yeah, I mean,
and then the hints that we get. I mean, it kind of wraps up. He's got a bit of a knife fight because she tries to take him out. Um, but it seems like he wins the day. The next thing we know, he's back talking with his friend Monin, saying he kind of learned a lesson and will be celebrating Nodens and his night gaunts from evermore. So I'm I'm wondering if Nodens jumped in to save the day.
Well, I think the question that it raises for me is that since death is pretty much a foregone conclusion in Revival, and
Mm,
it's, for players anyway, not going to be an uncommon experience,
mhm.
does Jin live to tell the tale because he died and successfully navigated Anime's realm for a res? You know? Or did something else happen to save the day? And the only clue that I have for um, the possibility of, it's very simple. He died, he rezzed, and now he's back to tell the tale, is the gleam in Monan's eye when they're recounting it at the end of the blog story.
Mm, mhm, mhm.
And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, it's like, so if we are effectively Jin
Mhm,
as players,
mhm.
and we're, doing our job poorly or well, depending on the moment, and we find these things that in an epic kind of story, then should we make the wrong choice when it comes to a dialogue option, or we croak, um, at an opportune time. I mean, do we live to tell the tale because we navigated anime's realm? I
Hmm.
mean, so anyway, that's an open question again.
Hmm.
But that's kind of where I went with it.
Okay, what did you think, Sale?
I'm more partial to Night Guts showed up and kicked fish butt. Not necessarily for any sort of, you know, uh, or rather, and did so mainly out of, I guess you would call it either instinct or mechanical faith, which I'll explain in just a second. But the reason, I mean, I think the reason that Renan has a twinkle in his eye is because obviously his bro is sitting right there with him drinking, right? And Jin's being all dramatic, like I knew that was the end, right? But it wasn't.
Hmm.
Come
Hmm.
on, tell me how you made it out of this scrap, right?
Hmm.
That's my thought. More so. Um, and the reason though that another reason that I think it's more probable that the Night Gaunts just sort of showed up and did stuff and that Jin didn't get wrecked is because I would effectively say that the Night Gaunts being uh, agents of Nodens effectively have an enemy of my enemy thing going on. Well, no, not enemy of my enemy, but like, if it's a proxy war thing, right, where Jin and this random neutral captain, right, are the proxies, right? I mean, they're not necessarily fighting, right, but like they're the pawns in this
Hmm.
thing, and so the Night Gaunts, because there's Trinity of the Sea stuff going down, naturally just want to stop it, right?
Yeah.
So they detect some, by whatever concordance, they sense either Dagon stuff or Hadra stuff. I don't actually know which, and that's something I'm thinking about actively um, going on right within their domain, and then they just throw a fucking fit and save or rather just again kick fish butts.
Hmm.
That's my thought. I think it's a fairly kind of deterministic delineated thing, but who knows, he could have just gotten swallowed alive because his puny dagger knife thing just fucking bent sideways, and then yeah, who knows, maybe fish like to eat pork. I don't know. Long pork. I don't know, man.
Well, it just occurred to me that the orphanage is under the protection of Nodens, right?
By proximity, at least.
So that could automatically invoke the Night Gaunts, since they're the
Right. Yeah.
protectors.
No, that's exactly what I think happened. Was you know apropos of some random you know undisclosed adherence to Nodens worship by Dame Hilfland, um, or Hiflin rather. I don't. I think it's just by proximity to the cathedral. Or, one might even contend that the entire island, or at least the
Hmm.
city proper, is under the general protection of Nodens,
Hmm.
or at least has an affinity in that direction.
Yeah.
So, yeah, exactly, Polaris. That's pretty much how I think it went.
Yeah. Either way, it's cool. It's definitely fun speculating.
Hmm. Um, yeah, I think the thing that I liked best out of the whole thing was the hint that that you could be looking at something like the wife, and clearly she's wearing a veil, um, but you don't have the clues or the tags to detect that something fishy is going on beneath the veil until you've gathered more clues or gathered more tags. Um, and then that might open it up so that you can see beneath the veil what you couldn't see before. Um, and how that will play out through other systems, you know. Jin is not a red shirt guy.
Well, I don't know. I'm speculating.
If he is, he made it back.
That's right.
I don't know. I think he's the red shirt that gets to tell his tale, right? It's the standard. We have action going on, and now we need the regular Joe guy to have his narrative turn. Um, but hey,
Um, Elia asks in chat, was there a real possibility that this story would end with a mess, assuming ST interaction? And Snipe says, well, yeah, if Janet slacked even worse and just sent the doctor back after he reported into the wife, would have been a whole different story.
Right.
Hopefully, he still would have been safe. The orphanage might not have been safe. I don't know. Maybe Nodens and the Night Gods still would have had to come in and save the day for the doctor. I don't know.
right? Yeah.
Cool. So that wraps up the blog. Did you guys have any final thoughts on the blog overall?
I have some cliffhanger thoughts. Well, not thoughts on the cliffhanger, but rather thoughts that are themselves cliffhangers for other
Hmm.
topics of discussion. Um, Namely, were the fish butts were they human transformed into fish butts? Or were they fish butts disguised as human? Um, Second, uh, wait, wait, I had it. Hold on. No. Ah, that's disappointing. I don't know. There was another one. It was something about um, whether the whether Dagon and Hydra were, you know, like who was actually acting in this particular case, right? I mean, we have the star portents that are suggesting that there's going to be a conjunction, I believe it was,
Hmm.
between the signs of Dagon and Hydra under a red moon soon, which presumably would be bad for all regular Crownstock folk. Um, if the affinities are anything to go by. And then, I guess the question being, right, like we know that Dagon and Hydra um, form part of the Trinity of the Sea. Um, Effectively being whether the fish butts were Dagon's bros or whether they were Hydra bros. Um, I don't know, and just little details like that. Um,
Yeah, I'm guessing with all the sigils from Hadra, it's got to be that, right? Instead of
right,
Dagon. But
then what's the dealio with the scroll, right? I mean, presumably the captain has more involvement with this than would
Right.
otherwise be, belied by his status, right? Why do you need this particular captain? Um, Assuming that all lives are somewhat relatively equal in the scope of sacrifice things, you'd be much better off, I imagine, doing
it's
dastardly things.
because the wife has to get rid of the husband so that she has all the voting rights. It's
But I
all
don't
about
think
the
the wife.
voting.
But here's the thing, right? Like we never actually confirmed that the wife was the wife. I don't think. I mean, of course, I don't have a way to say that she wasn't, aside from the fact that she's fish butts. But
Hmm.
like, was I can't imagine that establishing a bunch of establishing a small shipping, uh, or rather taking over a small shipping vessel by killing two birds, or a company rather, by killing two birds with one stone of human sacrifice is, and for the purpose of gaining solely money and shipping, right, is the
Well,
most sensible way for followers of Hadra or Dagon to exert their influence on whatever dastardly thing they've got coming up next, right? Like
Right.
my thought is that Poma didn't actually have a wife, right? The fish butts was just masquerading as the wife in order to dupe Jin into giving the, or finding the
but
location.
but if it's Lovecraft, then it probably was the wife. She just didn't know she was a fish butt until the
Oh,
Hadra
right.
came into
Fair,
until Hadra came into the
fair,
stars.
super fair assessment. Completely fair assessment. I just got
Was the
wrecked.
sacrifice
I
to
just got.
Poma, or was it the
I.
slaves? I mean,
I
at
have
what point
been.
is this worth it?
Yeah.
No,
Oh
I'm
man.
just trying to move us over to the suffragettes so we can start talking about the oligarchy in the politics thread. We had a cool thread a couple of weeks ago, I guess it was, from Sword Saint. And maybe I can even go ahead and link that real quick into the chat. Um, in the forums about the oligarchy status in Valir, hurting guild recruitment at launch. So that's another kind of nice tie-in with the wife and the captain being from Valir. But yeah, I think what we had heard was that that would mean something like only guilds could vote in Valir, and possibly even only guild leaders
Yep.
voting. Um, did you get a chance to take a look at that, Sailkite? Yeah, what did you guys think?
Well, I was kind of was trying to wrap my head around what exactly was it that prompted Sword Saint to start the thread. And I know that later down the thread, he was just really happy to get a good, lively discussion going about it.
Hmm.
But I think I'm going to guess, and I could be all wet, but I'm going to guess that his concerns had to do with how guild recruiting tends to work with the more, first, in some cases, tends to work with the greater the number, the greater the influence.
Hmm.
That's not true everywhere, but for a lot of guilds, that is how it works. So I could see the concern if you're trying to get some huge guild together, with lots of numbers, lots of members, and therefore lots of influence, that if there's only one vote, regardless of the size of the guild, then that could hurt recruiting, because then there's kind of an even playing field when numbers don't matter. And
Hmm.
one of the things that raised then is a series of other questions about, because of Snipe's response, that basically he confirmed that purchasing a home will always confer voting rights in your neighborhood, but then how each nation state's politics function above that level is what varies from nation to nation. So then
Hmm.
that opens up this whole bunch of questions about what kinds of governmental structures could be created in all the cities that we know about so far and those that haven't yet rolled out.
Hmm.
I mean, that's just a lot of potential there for theory crafting on political structure. And I think one of the big questions that came up specifically with regard to Valir is, we know that Valir has slavery.
Mm.
So, what political structure is common, at least historically, with slavery? Is
Mm.
it oligarchy?
Mm.
So that's my question.
You mean historically in Boston or in
No,
real
just
life?
No,
real
historically,
Okay,
world.
historically in human life. I mean,
okay,
just
okay. Just wanted to clarify.
Hmm.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, I was wondering what. So it seemed, because it seems to me it's kind of like a republic. So as you're talking about what other forms had slavery, and I'm thinking our republic did, for one. Um, would you have a situation where the guild members are kind of voting on who's going to be the guild leader, um, and therefore they're able to um, influence the voting that way by voting on the guild leader specifically, and then the guild leader is the one that actually has the voting power within the city itself. Um, but I think, like you're saying, Polaris, it depends. It really depends on how it's set up, and it could be set up differently in different cities.
yeah, and that's just a lot of potential
Hmm.
and a lot of fun.
Hmm. Um, the other thing, so we had this. I just want to touch fairly quickly on the sacrifice thread where we were wondering if it would really be possible to kidnap players. We're thinking not, because there's the 7-second rule, where the devs don't want to take player agency away from the players for more than 7 seconds. Um, and so we probably I think we probably are not going to be able to take control over other people's bodies. But I'm wondering, like with this drug, what ways might we be able to essentially afflict other players in such a way that maybe we drug them and that hits their stats, and we have the antidote. So let's say that that's going to give them temporal damage. If we don't give them the antidote, would we be able to say, hey, vote our way or spread these pamphlets the way I say, or you get temporal damage until I give you the antidote? How does extortion go into the way of voting? I mean, and politics in general. I'm just wondering if it would be fun if we're able to influence votes that way.
Yeah, I don't know whether we'd be able to do that on players, right? I mean, I could see it working just fine against NPCs, right? I mean, you go and you become a narcotics dealer and a kingpin, right? You set up your whole little, neighborhood empire. You get all the youth in the city, west of a certain block or road, addicted to whatever, spooky thing it is that you have them addicted to, right? And you basically, control them with that, right? I can see that working just fine with NPCs. But with players, it's weird, right? Because there's actually within the question of the 7 second rule and stuff. There's actually a secondary question. Actually, it's out. It's encompasses the first question, and namely that's a question of scope, right? In effective terms, what what scope or scopes, there may be simultaneous scopes on player, what we call player agency at any given time, and how does that want to be addressed, right, by the devs and such. I mean, so I guess the example I'm conjuring in my head, even though we have kind of answers for this particular case, is like the jail scenario, right? So imagine, your typical Elder Scrolls-ish kind of thing, right? You go and do a crime, and you're put in jail, right? Now, technically, your freedom of choice and agency has been limited, right? You are, now confined to a space that you must get out of in order to go and do the rest of everything, right? By, probably what, like 3 or 4 ways usually, right? Either like, buy your way out, sneak your way out, or like, talk your way out and then like fight your way out, right? Like that's usually kind of the options that are given in the case of the jail scenario in that kind of RPG. Um, but but technically you're still able to act, right? You still retain control of your character. You can choose among those 4 options which one you want to do and which makes the most sense, and then continue on that way. Now, of course, I know that in the particular case of jail and revival, like the chances of a hard jail sentence being imposed on players, at least in the sense of them the player having to deal with the durational consequence of a crime and not just a character via temporal damage or similar, is fairly limited, right? Like as far as I know, there's not an intention to lock away the actions of a character for longer than 7 seconds, or that is to say, put them in a relatively unescapable jail scenario for longer than, if you will, 7 seconds. But like, in the case of sacrifice and something that large, let's say, okay, you drink the mead or the grog or whatever, the rum, and you fall unconscious, right? They now have your body, assuming that that's possible. I don't even know, but like assuming that it is, right? Then at that point, like if they're good, you've lost control, right? You have absolutely, unless you're the crazy mage bro who can just, cantrip a fireball, on, a pin's drop, you're pretty much stuck in their bonds and stuff. And so, at that point, you've lost agency, right? But like, if you're a political prisoner, like, have you lost agency? Like, there's There's a
Well, so
scope
yeah,
thing.
right.
Like
But I'm
it's
saying, so
fuzzy.
I don't think we'll be able to have prisoners, but we might be able to have drugs that affect stats. So you still have agency. It's just that you maybe your madness stat is raised, or maybe you've got impending temporal damage. So there's things that you can do. You can go and try and find your own antidote. Um, and things like that. There's other things that you can still do. It's not stopping you from doing anything. You just have a hit. Maybe your strength is lower, or maybe your perception is lower, um, things like that. So you have a hit to some stat, um, and other people can hold the antidote if there's specific antidotes for specific poisons. Um, that's what I was
Well,
thinking. That's part of what I got kind of from the a possibility that might be coming or hinted at through the blog too, is that it won't take you completely out of the running, but maybe there's little things that you can do.
yeah, I think there's the line between that and other things like simply being drunk or getting drunk in game is really kind of blurry. I
Mm,
mean, I've played games where um, the experience of being drunk is,
mhm,
created for the player by fucking around with your screen.
mhm,
Now, in some games you can turn that off, and in other games you can't.
mhm.
So you effectively your ability to play the game is actually impaired. You
Or
can still
the
play the
yeah,
game, but it's impaired.
yeah,
So, under the circumstance of being impaired, other things then become possible,
yeah,
and that's
and
ordinary gameplay. So I don't know. I think it's interesting.
yeah, and the drug I want, you guys have to put this in. They're in chat. You guys have to put this in. Is a drug that affects ED or sexual function.
Yeah, I saw you mention that in the thread. And I was
We,
like, oh
we, we
wow.
need a drug that makes sex more difficult unless you take the antidote.
No, but Diggs, that's pay to win though, because they can they can sell the antidote via the store, and then that way, if you get locked out of the sex mini game and you can't play it, and you have to buy an antidote out of the store, then it's de facto pay to win by
And then you lose
proxy,
that buff, whatever that
right?
buff
Through
is.
through quasi blackmail, with a nod to Stockholm syndrome. I'm just trying to soup this up with the most absurd thing I can. But yeah, that's clearly pay to win, and that's a no go, obviously. So no ED drug for you. I don't know. I think it'd be interesting, but
um, yeah, it makes me wonder what kind of drugs might be available. Are there drugs that will, increase your stamina for that, or your, sexual prowess, and they're the flip side of that will, reduce that. I just wonder what, and again, even like with madness versus non-madness, all those things.
you see now Dix is gonna make slash or rather subtext. I'm going to make for Diggs an alt in which he is a subversive, effective psychiatrist, right? Where he's drugging, his neighbors to have ED and make them feel all bad about their lives so that they will then come to him for advice and counsel and spiritual guidance
Well,
so that he can make continuous bank on their misery and suffering.
I did have a courtesan alt who is something of a psychologist,
But
advisor
she
to
was good, right?
politicians.
She was
To
trying to
well, she influences politicians. Whether or not you think that's good or not
fair,
might depend
fair.
on what you're trying to do. There's some intrigue going on there, but um, I had not thought at that time about messing up their sexual mojo as part of that process, but I was wondering what drugs might be effective.
There's room for
Uh,
it, so it's just whether they choose to implement it.
mhm. Um, are either of you partial to a particular political style?
Personally, I mean, I'd probably let my parents get
In
at it.
game, what in game are you gravitating towards some political style that you think in terms of a city where you would want to live if they didn't start with what you wanted, if Crowns Rock wasn't a voting system that you were partial to?
Nah, I don't care
Partial.
about that stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be cool to see some like weird pluralistic society, but like I don't even know what that means. I'm just saying the words. But I mean, I do know what the words mean. But like, yeah, at least for a large scale thing, I think the oligarchy thing will be interesting. As however it develops. Though I don't think personally I'd want to like operate in that particular kind of environment. Um, but yeah, I mean, I guess the other thing too is I'd almost be interested in a situation where you can sacrifice neighborhood voting rights. But I guess presumably at the gain of some other thing,
Mhm.
um, or rather, not how do I want to put it? Like I guess I would be intrigued to see a city in which you would be able to still buy property or whatever, but then you have a disclaimer, right, that you'd have to agree to out of character, or basically a notification like, note, you don't get voting rights here, because assuming that like if it's an assumed privilege of buying any property that you get voting rights, then not getting that would have to be stated relatively clearly. But like, I'd be interested what one could gain at the sacrifice of that,
Hmm.
and then, or rather, I guess particularly, I just want to see like whether people would improvise a de facto system into the game to do the exact same thing without the system needing to be present. But
Yeah,
hey,
Snipe says, give your vote to a proxy in exchange for some sort of benefit. Interesting.
Yeah.
well, isn't that exactly what basically the tenement mogul does? Right? Like the archetype of the person who comes and buys like 500 tenements and then makes their, tenants vote a certain way, right? Or else they get kicked out and evicted.
There you go. That's funny.
Like I thought we actually talked about that like on the forums a way, way long ago when people were worried about pay to win.
Yep.
Right? Where it's like, no, they're gonna own all these votes and property because they bought it and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, they will, but like you know.
Right.
Only for the
Snipe
neighborhood.
says drugs are actually important to us and that we need them to ensure the criminal underworld has trade opportunities of its own. So expect a whole suite of drugs with varying effects and side effects. That's vague, but what he's getting at is that they're really only looking at the surface of how that will go so far. Um, yeah, this mention of suffragette had me wondering if there might be some city where only women get to vote.
I'd like to see a matriarchal society. I
Hmm.
think that'd be cool.
It'd be fun. It'd be different.
Yeah, I'd be really interested to see the trappings that Ombla and his team would um, put in conjunction with that, um, just in terms of societal values. Like, I'd be very interested to see that.
I'm
Um,
hoping that it will just be very different. Lots of variously evolving kinds of structures.
Hmm.
yeah, for sure.
I think that'll be really lively.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're wrapping up for this week. Next week, we're supposed to have Sir Bayou on, and he will tell us how to pronounce his name, and Zero. And we will be talking about, and Sail Kite, of course. We'll be talking about whatever the latest blog is. Anybody remember? I forgot to check to see what next week's blog is about.
Kadrin will be talking about animal husbandry,
Oh, interesting. Okay.
which is obviously a form of PvP.
And we were hoping to also, yeah, talk about RP and PvP. We had a cool thread last week about that, I think, or maybe the week before. Um, and then Polaris will be back with this the week after that. Possibly with this, I think that might be the week that we will have Ombwa on cam with us.
Yep.
So I think that does it. Thank you guys for showing up. And yeah, and everybody in chat for showing up too.
Have a
Have
great week,
a great
everyone.
week.
Thanks, everybody.